Hi knitters, it's Laurie. I wanted to say hello, check in, see how all of you are doing. I made what was supposed to be a short video, and I apologize for the length. I did try and speed it up there in the middle, but I wanted to show you how to knit a gauge swatch, which is a fairly important aspect of knitting. If any of you have taken a look at other knitting patterns besides the one that we are doing, then you're going to see that it comes up a lot. It is a part of patterns that helps you measure how many stitches you are getting per inch, and then that helps you stay on track for whether you're knitting within the guidelines of the different patterns. So take a look. I suggest actually that you take a look at some other patterns. If you've got time on your hands right now, which if you're like me, you do, go to Ravelry.com and start an account. It's free. It's a really interesting place to look around, find other beginning knitters or advanced knitters, people to talk to. There are forums, there are patterns, there are all kinds of things to look at on there. I know that a lot of you said that you crochet. There is a ton of resources for crochet and other fiber arts on there as well. So if you don't already have an account on Ravelry, I highly recommend it. So anyway, this is the video that I made for how to knit a very small gauge swatch so that you can measure your knit stitches. At one point I did say that I would show you how to purl stitch, and I will do a different video on how to purl stitch, I promise. Okay knitters, I am going to show you how to knit a swatch, a gauge swatch. So here I have my yarn. You can see it's fairly thick yarn. I have pulled out a whole bunch of yarn, so I'm gonna go ahead and throw this off camera. And then I'm going to grab my knitting needles. You can see I have straight needles here, so they're very long. They're a little different than the needles that you got in class. I'm gonna hold this really close to the camera. Hopefully it's gonna focus. There we go. So you can see it says 6.5 millimeters. That's those tiny little letters there are MM, so it's millimeters. And then it says US 10.5. So 6.5 millimeters is the equivalent to US size 10.5. So the size in our pattern is a size 10. I don't have any straight needles that are US size 10, so I'm going to be using a US size 10.5 for this demonstration. So let us get started. There's the end of my yarn. I'm going to set this down while I make my slip knot. I'm going to hold the yarn, and then I'm going to flip this over, and then I'm going to grab my yarn here, pull this through, hold on to the knot, and then slide my needle through. Tighten things up, and then I'm going to grab onto the tail there, and I'm going to loosely hold it by the knot here, you can see right there. And I'm going to start my backwards loop cast on. So this is what we did. Here, I'm going to move this out of the way. I think that might be a little confusing having that in the background. This is what we did in the first class. So I'm going to bring this back around. Now remember, this slip stitch, that counts as your first stitch. So this is going to be my second stitch. So I have 2. All right, we're going to bring it just a little closer to the end there. Now I have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So there we go, spread them out a little so you can see them all. So I have now cast on 10 stitches. That's what I'm going to use to do the gauge swatch. Okay, so a gauge swatch is really useful when you just want to measure how many stitches your specific knitting is for a pattern. So you basically are seeing how tight your stitching is, and you can see how many stitches you're getting per inch, basically. So I'm gonna just do 10 stitches, and I'm gonna do 10 rows, and I'm gonna do knit stitch, but then I will also do a demonstration on purl stitching. Okay, so I've got my 10 stitches already cast on. Now remember, this is a video, so you can rewind it and you can slow it down. It's going to be posted on YouTube. There is a feature down at the bottom, somewhere around here, where in the settings, I believe, where you can slow the video down. So you can rewind it and slow it down to see what I did on at any part of this video. Okay, so this is our first knit stitch. Now, see, I already almost twisted my stitches, so I want to make sure all of my stitches are facing the same way. All right, and then I bring my needle up under the first stitch. Okay, and then I'm holding both of my needles. When I grab my other yarn, I grab my loose yarn. What is that called? The tail of the yarn, not the tail. Grab the yarn, and I'm gonna bring it all the way around the bottom needle. And then I'm going to use that bottom needle to pull it through. Okay, and then as I pull it through, I'm pushing that other needle out. I'm sure that did not make sense. Let's do it again. Okay, I'm gonna wrap this around my finger. We're gonna go into the bottom of this stitch, just into the one strand. So into the one strand. I'm gonna bring this piece of yarn around, bring it through, and then take it off of that needle. Okay, into the one strand. Bring this piece of yarn around. You'll notice that as I'm doing this, I'm pushing the rest of the stitches in my left hand up the needle in my left hand, so that it becomes kind of a fluid movement, so that as I'm knitting with my right hand, my left hand is helping the process along by taking the stitches that are still on the left side needle and making them more accessible to the needle on the right. Okay, so under, yarn around, pull that yarn through and pull the stitch off. Okay. So for our last stitch in this first row, hold on to that tail. You see, I'm gonna just hold on to that. We're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna go into the bottom of the stitch. Okay. Try and get a good angle here. Okay. Okay. yarn through and then pull it all the way off. Your needles are now separate. All of your stitches are on your right hand needle. Okay, you still have 10. All right, and you have this extra little bit down here. So, and don't worry if they're not all perfectly even. Like I have this one down here that looks like it's got a little bit of extra yarn in it. Not the end of the world, okay? And then I have my tail over here. All right, the rest of my yarn is coming off. It's on the same side as the tail. All right, what we're gonna do now, we are going to flip this needle around. You can see it looks a little different on this side. My stitching looks different. That's because we're looking at the purl side now. And we are going to put this needle into my left hand. Ooh, hit my light there. And we are going to take this needle that has no stitches on it and we're going to put that in my right hand. All right. So now what happens is I'm going to keep knitting. I'm going to keep knitting even though this is the purl side. All right. And we're going to see what happens. So I've got this first stitch here. I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to go to the bottom, go into the bottom of this stitch. All right. Bottom of this stitch. I'm going to grab this yarn just like I did before and wrap it around this finger and bring it around this first stitch here. Off of the needle. Okay. Then I'm going to go into this first stitch, or second stitch, apologies. Pull that yarn through, off of the needle, into my third stitch here. Yarn around. And so on. Start going a little faster now. Okay, going to the end of our second row. And pull that last stitch off of there. And you can see we have now one row that is purl and one row that is knit. Okay. You can't really tell so far. You don't have enough really to be able to tell. We're going to do the same thing that we did with at the end of the last row though. And I'm going to take this needle and put it in my left hand. And I'm going to take the needle with no stitches and put it in my right hand. Move your stitches up to the end of your needle. Take your yarn. Go into the bottom of this first stitch. Okay. Wrap it around. Bring it through. Move your stitches up. There we go. Try to knit your stitches evenly, keeping the same amount of tension. As you knit each stitch, try not to get too tight on each stitch. In fact, when I was first starting to knit, I had to consciously tell myself to loosen up. Not an easy thing to do. I wanted to make my stitches very, very tight. And when you are first knitting, that is typically what you want to do. But it is much easier later on, if you can keep your stitches nice and loose, because it is no fun trying to squish your needle in there. It is much easier to just be able to easily slide your needle into the bottom of that stitch. So the more you can tell yourself, nice and loose, right when you're wrapping your yarn around, the better. Right around there. Okay, so now we're on the end of our 4th row. Okay, you can see we're getting kind of a bit of a pattern now. It just basically probably looks a little lumpy to you. It looks a little lumpy to me too. This is called a garter stitch. So basically, just when you're knitting and you're knitting on straight needles, so you're flipping it over and knitting. That's what you end up with is a garter stitch. And a lot of knits that you find in stores are garter stitches. It's a nice thick stitch. It's good for sweaters. And it's very simple. It's just, like I said, it's just knitting. So it looks the same. You can see it looks essentially the same on both sides. So because both sides are the same, we're looking at purl row, knit row, purl row, or knit row, purl row. So we're gonna keep going. Okay, so we have 10 rows of garter stitch right here. It switches up in garter stitch. It tends to shrink. Yeah, this down. Tends to shrink this way, just because the way that the knit purl rows go together, they tend to kind of compress. So there's a lot of stretch this way. So it doesn't look like there are 10 rows, but there are. So anyway, I wanted to show you how to cast off on your knit gauge swatch here. So again, like cast-ons, there are just a bunch of different ways to cast off. I'm actually not entirely sure what the name of this cast off is called. This is just the kind of cast off that I tend to use. I think it's a pretty typical cast off. So you knit the first 2 stitches, and then you bring the first stitch over. Okay, so we're going to do that again. We're going to do that with all of the stitches actually. So you knit that stitch and you bring that second stitch and you bring it over. So there are never more than 2 stitches. Gonna bring it around. So you knit it, take it off of the needle, but then you stick that needle into the second stitch and pull the first stitch through. Kind of weird, I know, but as you can see right here, our stitches are coming off. So go into the underneath of that stitch that that's going to be your second stitch on the needle, on the right hand needle. Bring the yarn around. Okay, then we're going to pull the stitch off of the left hand needle. Then we're going to take the left hand needle and go into the second stitch on the right and pull the first stitch on the right through. And that's how we finish things up. So you just keep doing that until you have no more stitches left on the left. Again, you want to do this with loose yarn, otherwise your stitches on the top are going to be really tight and it's going to be really hard, in particular, to bring this stitch over this stitch. Bring that stitch under here. So keep this yarn loose when you bring it around. Stitch over. Okay, here's our last stitch. We're gonna have no more stitches left on the left, but we're still gonna use this last stitch. Bring it through. Okay. And then we're going to use the left needle to help us yarn off of there. You can see what I'm doing here. And we're going to sort of split. I know this is confusing right here. To get that yarn through that last stitch. Okay, set that down. So we want yarn through that last stitch. Set that down. All right. Okay. All right. So we can tell that I stitch on this yarn. So here's one stitch. So we can tell on this yarn, and you want to measure in the middle, that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm knitting right now 6 stitches per 2 inches. So that's 3 stitches an inch, obviously. Okay, I just wanted to take this opportunity to go over a couple of knitting patterns with you guys, just in case you don't have time to go over to Ravelry. This first one is for this cute cap sleeve sweater. You can see where the yellow arrow indicates that it indicates this specific gauge, 4.5 stitches per inch. That means that with this particular yarn on this particular sized needle, that's how many stitches per inch they expect you to get in order to achieve the number of, to achieve the sizes that they are indicating with the number of stitches that they're indicating. So of course it's an inexact science, and we haven't really talked a lot about yarn gauges a whole lot yet. I think that in my previous email I may have sent out a link that explained yarn gauges. If not, I'll take a look. And if not, I'll send it in the next email. But there are different weights of yarns. There's chunky and bulky. There's fingering weight yarn, which is a very small yarn used for lace making. There's DK and worsted weight. So there are all different kinds of weights of yarn, and you want to make sure that when you're doing a pattern, if you can't use the yarn specified, you get as close as possible to that same weight of yarn. And of course you want to use the same size needles as indicated in the pattern. So and then I found another pattern that also, okay, so this other one is for this very cute dog sweater, and it's a little more complex than the cap sleeve shirt. It says 11 stitches and 16 rows equals 4 inches in stocking stitch. So that means that they want you to do a gauge swatch of 16 rows, and they want you to get 11 stitches across and 16 rows long, and they want it to equal approximately 4 inches, and they want you to do it in stockinette stitch, which is not garter stitch. Remember in this video we did garter stitch, so that I was knitting every row. And so stockinette stitch is where you knit one row and you purl the next row. So I'm going to go over that in the next video that I do. So you'll see that coming up. But so more on that to come. Okay, knitters. So anyway, that's my video. I hope you found it helpful. I'm sorry again that it was so long. But anyway, go back and find the parts that are useful and email me at ldreyer@rcls.org if you have any questions, and let me know if you find these emails helpful. I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to try and make another video about the purl stitch, in which I'll show you the stockinette stitch, yeah, I'll keep sending resources, and yeah, and we'll keep going. So I hope all of you are healthy and well, and that's about it. So until the library opens again,